Have you ever felt like your life was being written by someone else? Like no matter how hard you tried, you were just a side character in someone else's story? If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or told your voice doesn't matter, this story was written for you. They told me my mother left nothing behind but her name, and even that was half erased by the time I was old enough to ask. No inheritance, no keepsakes, just the hushed way the maids flinched when her name passed their lips. Miran's mother, they'd call her when they thought I wasn't listening, like I had no right to grieve someone who had never belonged fully to me. But that wasn't the truth. Not really. Not completely. Because on the night of my 17th birthday, I found it. The one thing she did leave, hidden behind the oldest panel in the shrine at the far end of our estate's north wing, a shrine that hadn't been touched in over a decade. My hand brushed dust off the cracked marble basin, fingertips grazing symbols that pulsed faintly even through the grime. Something in my chest tightened. It wasn't grief. It was something older, deeper. Recognition, maybe, or warning. The box was wrapped in silk, so faded it had turned the color of old bones. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. The fabric fell away like it had been waiting to be shed. Beneath it lay a leather-bound book, its edges worn, but not with time, with resistance. I could feel it resisting me even before I opened it. The cover was blank, no title, no author. But I knew, without knowing how, that this was my story. The moment I touched it, something hummed beneath my skin. Not a sound, a vibration, a recognition in the marrow. I hesitated only a breath before lifting the cover, and the world tilted sideways. There, scrawled in looping script so familiar it made my throat ache, was my name, Calith Arden. Not a nickname, not a moniker, my full name. And below it, the words began to unspool like ink bleeding through skin. The first chapter described the jade clip I wore in my hair every third day, the way my left foot dragged slightly when I was tired, the fact that I hummed old lullabies I didn't remember learning whenever I was alone. It didn't read like fantasy. It didn't even read like prophecy. It read like surveillance. I flipped ahead, skimming through the pages. Every betrayal I hadn't yet experienced was laid out like stepping stones, leading toward a chapter titled 27. I didn't breathe as I read it, not once. She collapsed where no one could see her. No sword, no poison, no hero's tears, just a quiet, discarded ending buried beneath grander fates. Like I was never meant to be mourned, just used and forgotten. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My thumb found the beginning again, as if to test whether the cruelty had always been there. I traced the first line. She never mattered, but she served her purpose. Something cracked, not in the book, in me. All the stories I'd read growing up, all the roles people wore like armor, the beloved, the hero, the betrayer, the seer, even the villain, they all had purpose, meaning, a final scene that the world remembered. But me? I was a plot device. The expendable ghost meant to push someone else toward greatness. I don't remember standing, only the weight of the book in my arms as I walked the long hall toward the hearth in the abandoned east wing. The fire was cold. I lit it anyway. The kindling sparked too fast, as if it knew, as if even the flames had read ahead and understood what this moment meant. The book fought back. The fire hissed like it had a voice, like the ink was screaming. Pages curled and blackened, but not easily. As if the words were crawling, trying to escape, trying to rewrite themselves in the smoke. I didn't look away. I watched it all. I watched the spine split, the cover blacken, the final page fold in on itself. Somewhere, deep inside, I expected something to happen. A jolt, a punishment, an unraveling. Instead, the silence that followed was heavier. The air didn't clear. It settled, like something had been loosened but not released. I stood in the ash, the smell of burnt parchment in my hair, and whispered into the smoke. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? That I'd walk quietly into a death no one would write poems about. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was cleaner than that. A precise, surgical coldness, as if part of me had finally come into focus. Chapter 27 was your ending. Mine starts here. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the cold ashes until dawn crept through the broken window panes and laid pale light across the floor. The world outside didn't change. The bells still rang for morning classes. The maids still lit candles in the hall. But something in the marrow of the story had shifted. I didn't know then what I know now. That burning the book didn't erase the fate. It marked me. Not as a free girl, but as a glitch. A question the world didn't have an answer for. And the story? The one that had written me out? It doesn't like loose threads, and I had just torn a hole straight through its spine. Still, I remember the he on my face, the way the flames danced like they were tasting something new. I remember how it felt to choose anything for the first time, even if that choice was destruction. And I remember thinking, if this was my beginning, then let it begin in fire. Let the story burn with me, or bend to me. But I would never lie down again. Not quietly, not conveniently, not ever. Because I had read the ending, and I refused to play dead. Not when I'd just learned how to hold the pen. Astera was beautiful in the way graveyards are beautiful, solemn, orderly, and painfully deliberate. Its sky always looked painted, its streets too clean, too symmetrical. Everything had a place, a rhythm, a reason. People here didn't live, they performed. We all did. And for a while, I believed I was part of that harmony. Before the book. Before the fire. Now I could see the stage scaffolding behind the gold, and it rattled when I walked past. Astera's foundation was the Great Cycle, the holy system where everyone was born with a glowing title etched at the base of their neck, visible only when summoned. Each title declared your purpose: the hero, the beloved, the betrayer, the catalyst. You were not merely named, you were narrated. Children were sorted into guilds, careers, and alliances before their voices fully broke. Marriages were forecasted before affection could root. Even tragedy had choreography, except for me. My title had always been off, smudged. Not faded like the dying, not sealed like the banished, just unclear. No scholar could decipher it. No oracle could divine its role. The archivists would purse their lips, jot down unremarkable, and move on, as though I were too small a detail to correct. I used to believe them. Now I know the truth. I hadn't been overlooked. I'd been scrubbed out, erased from every epic I should have stained. Not because I was powerless, but because I wasn't supposed to interfere. Plot devices don't get to shape the climax. They get to trigger it and disappear. I walked through the marble gates of the Institute of Arcane Names with that knowledge coiled around my throat like a second spine. I'd studied here since I was 12, trained in diplomacy, theory, combat strategy. I'd sat beside heirs to the kingdom and girls born for crowns. Back then, they'd tolerated me. Now they watched me like I was cracked glass about to shatter. They didn't know about the book, or the fire, or the death I had dodged by unspooling my own fate. But they felt it. That something no longer matched the script they'd grown up reciting. That a line had changed somewhere, and I was at the center of the misalignment. I caught it in their eyes first. Small moments, tiny fractures. Professor Dellin, normally as precise as a blade, stammered during roll call when he reached my name. Calith are... present? Present, but wrong. Like a misplaced comma in a spell. I answered him anyway, voice flat. Still alive, Professor. Sorry to disappoint. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way my classmates averted their gazes, the way people left chairs empty beside mine in the mess hall. Even the walls of the institute, etched with luminous threads of collective fate, dimmed ever so slightly as I passed. Like the threads themselves were uncertain whether to include me. I tested it. In the Hall of Echoes, where we practiced fate-weaving, the act of interpreting stories into strategic vision, I offered an alternative ending to the Battle of Marion's Gate. It was subtle, just one change. The hero doesn't sacrifice the girl. He sacrifices the prophecy. The instructor's mouth twitched. That's Not the way it was written. But it's the way it could have been, I said softly. The glass runes around us flickered, for just a second, but I saw it. So did he. Later, in the library vaults, I tried to find my old records. The archives didn't recognize my passcode. When I finally got in using a shadow copy of my guardian's seal, I found my dossier sealed in a rusted drawer marked Narrative Artifacts. As if I wasn't a person, just a footnote someone had forgotten to delete. I opened it. Blank. No lineage, no assigned arc, just a faint imprint beneath the parchment, like a word once pressed into flesh. Plot. Dev. I tore the paper before I read the rest. And I understood then. The world wasn't glitching. I was. A living contradiction, walking proof that the script could be burned and stories hate being rewritten. At first, I tried to stay quiet, to observe, but that only made it worse. The hero stopped smiling at me in the halls, not out of cruelty, out of memory. He didn't know what memory, but his bones did. His posture stiffened when I walked past, like something had once broken inside him because of me, like his muscles remembered grief before his mind did. And the beloved? Sarah? She greeted me like a friend, but her compliments bruised like weapons. "You've always had such persistence," she said one morning, offering me a seat too far from the sun. "It's admirable how you keep showing up." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked. Sarah tilted her head. "Oh, no reason, just... Not everyone was meant to be seen, Caliph." I smiled, but something in me curled. Then maybe the world should learn to look harder. I walked away before she could answer. I told myself I was calm, unbothered, that their fear was confirmation I was doing something right. But alone at the reflecting pool, I touched the back of my neck. Nothing. Still no title, no light, just skin, just me. I should have felt liberated, but all I felt was dangerous, even to myself. If the story could erase me, what else could it rewrite? Could it make the people I cared about forget me? Could it slip me into the wrong place, the wrong line, the wrong death? What happens to the sentence that breaks the story? Does it survive? Does it matter? Later that night, I stood in the observatory, watching the threadlights of the city shimmer and shift, each one tethered to a living title, humming in rhythm with the great cycle. Except one. Mine. The thread above my chamber didn't glow. It pulsed like a skipped heartbeat, like a glitch. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was aware. "I see it now," I whispered to the glass, voice shaking from something that wasn't cold. The way the professors look through me like they've forgotten what comes next. I placed my palm against the window, watching the lights shift. I'm not a typo. I'm the sentence that broke your story. And I'm just getting started. It was always his eyes. Miran Dareth, the hero of the Third Flame, with a name stitched into half a dozen ballads and a smile trained for war banquets. He never looked at me the way the others did. He didn't flinch like the professors or avoid me like the titled heirs. No, Myron looked at me like someone standing over a memory he couldn't place, like I was the shadow at the edge of a funeral he never attended but still grieved. It was subtle at first, a hesitation in his step when I crossed the practice yard, a pause too long when he spoke my name during group assignments. But the worst was the way he looked relieved, and then guilty, for seeing me alive. That's how I knew. The story had written me into his grief. My death was his transformation, his pain-forged origin. I wasn't a person in his arc. I was a ghost, the catalyst that broke him open and made him glorious. And though I was still breathing, something in him had already buried me. I began watching him, not out of fascination, but out of calculation. I needed to understand how far the damage ran, how deeply the story had etched my name into his bones. He moved like someone who carried sorrow under his ribs, precise, honorable, constant. He trained harder than the others, always an hour earlier, always 2 later. He spoke with that quiet steadiness they praised in epics. But when I stepped into his periphery, that steadiness wavered. And then there was Sarah. Sarah Mion, the beloved, whose golden braid always fell perfectly over one shoulder, whose title shimmered like polished glass, whose voice curled sweetly around cruelty. She had begun to linger near me, all concern and soft daggers. "Caliph," she'd say, voice low, fingers brushing my arm like we were friends. "You've seemed so distant lately. I worry you're not adjusting well." Adjusting to what? The knowledge I was supposed to die for her boyfriend's character development? "I'm fine," I told her, eyes steady. But Sarah always smiled as if she already knew what chapter I was trying to outrun. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sky over Astera never truly darkened. It pulsed with faint violet constellations, artificial stars powered by the kingdom's naming core. But the roof of the East Observatory was the one place the light dimmed just enough to see the real stars behind the facade. I found Miran there, standing at the edge of the glass balustrade, staring upward like he was searching for something to believe in. "I didn't think anyone else came up here," he said without turning. "I don't think anyone else sees the point," I replied. He looked over his shoulder, and the tension in his shoulders shifted, like he recognized me, but not from today, from somewhere older, deeper. There was silence between us, the good kind, the dangerous kind. "You ever feel like something's wrong?" I asked finally, voice low. He inhaled, slow and sharp. "You mean, like everything's off by half a breath? Like someone changed the music but left the lyrics behind?" I turned toward him fully. "Exactly that." He didn't look away. His voice softened, nearly crumbled. "Sometimes I dream of a grave I never saw, a stone under a willow, and you're always there, but not—" His throat bobbed. "Not alive." The air stretched thin between us, pulled taut by memory that wasn't his and pain that was mine. And for one reckless moment, I almost let pity bloom in my chest. But no. "Good," I said coldly, stepping closer. "Let the story haunt you instead of me." He flinched. "I was never meant to be your ghost," I continued. "I was meant to vanish so you could become something better. But I'm still here, and you're still waiting for a eulogy that never came. I didn't choose—" "No," I cut in, soft but sharp. "You didn't. That's the problem, isn't it? You think not choosing means not being responsible." His jaw tightened. "Tell me, hero," I whispered. "What happens when your grief doesn't arrive on time? Do you fall apart anyway? Or do you wait and wonder why the tears won't come?" He had no answer, and I didn't need one. I left him under that hollow sky. The next morning, the changes began. In the training yard, Miran missed his mark. For the first time since his ascension, he faltered. His opponent, a junior flame wielder, landed a strike against him and looked shocked to still be standing. Miran offered no excuse, no smile. Later, during a tactical exam, he proposed an unapproved strategy, one that had never been sanctioned by the war archivists, one that shouldn't have come to him. Because in my version of the war, that strategy was mine. He was remembering pieces of a story that no longer existed, or that never should have. And the beloved noticed. Sarah watched him that day with a smile carved from ice. Her hand grazed his wrist at dinner, but he pulled away before he realized what he was doing. I saw it all. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. Because this wasn't a victory. This was distortion. The more the story fractured, the more dangerous it would become. I thought I was erasing my death, but I was unspooling his soul to do it. Still, I couldn't stop. Not now. He was meant to cry for me, not remember me alive. And I wasn't finished rewriting him. "They wrote you a tear," I murmured under my breath, watching from the far end of the hall as Miran paused mid-step, glancing toward me with haunted eyes. "I rewrote you a consequence." And the consequence was coming. I could feel it. The threads were thinning, The narrative was unraveling. And somewhere, beneath the kingdom's script, something ancient had begun to stir. It was no longer just about me surviving Chapter 27. Now, it was about what broke when I didn't die. She found me where I thought no one else would look, beneath the white trellis arches of the Institute's lower garden, where the magnolia trees bloomed year-round and the statues never gathered dust, a place for the beloveds to sip summer tea and be adored. I had never belonged here, that was the point. Sarah Mion knew exactly where to stage her war. Her smile was already waiting for me when I rounded the last hedge, as soft and polished as her voice. "Calith," she said, like I was something found in her mirror, a shadow behind the reflection. "I've missed our conversations." I didn't offer her the lie of a returned smile. "That's unfortunate." She tilted her head slightly, gold hair coiled like royalty across her shoulder, voice as honeyed as ever. "I wanted to thank you for being so graceful these past few weeks." Graceful, that was a new word for it. I wondered what the Scorchiar IPT would call what I'd done. Disruptive, maybe. Unwelcome. "You've reminded him," she continued, eyes gleaming, "who he is." I should have flinched. That was her power, saying something that sounded like a blessing while lacing it with a blade. But I didn't flinch. "No," I said, calm and cruel. "I remind him what it means to lose." The smile faltered. A heartbeat, no more. Then she recovered, folding her hands like a hymn book. "That's not the kind of legacy you want to leave behind, is it? Better than no legacy at all." That was the thing about Sarah. She never yelled. She didn't need to. Every glance was a calculation, every step choreographed. If I was born a glitch, she was born the golden standard. The girl with the shine no one questioned. The kind of girl they designed happy endings for. I used to envy her. Now I understand her. Because Sarah had everything. And still, she needed me gone to keep it. At that moment, the garden around us seemed too quiet. The air is still. Even the flowers tilted toward us like they knew a scene was being written. And I knew she'd come prepared. "Of course," she said lightly, turning to walk beside me. "You'll understand that it's best you sit out the midwinter ball. Just for safety. These days, an unreadable title draws too much attention. It wouldn't be fair to the others." There it was, the real attack. She cloaked it in etiquette, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome at the most important event of the year. The ball was where alliances were sealed, titles glowed brightest, futures were performed in glitter and silk. I wasn't meant to be part of that tapestry. I let her walk a few paces ahead before answering. "You're right." She stopped. "It wouldn't be fair." Her head turned, just enough for me to see the flicker in her eyes. For a moment, she thought she'd won. Then I added, "Which is why I'll come dressed accordingly. Wouldn't want to disrupt perfection without warning." I left her in the garden, still smiling, but colder than she had arrived. That night, I went to the forbidden chamber. My mother's room had been sealed for years, not out of mourning, but out of fear. Her robes were still hidden behind false panels, warded to sting anyone who touched them with anything less than purpose. I opened the compartment. The silk inside shimmered with twilight tones. Indigo, smoke gray, hints of deep silver like stormlight trapped in fabric. I remembered none of her face, but the scent that clung to the robes, spice, and old paper, gripped something in my chest I hadn't realized was waiting to be claimed. I put them on. The night of the ball arrived like a prophecy waiting to fail. The ballroom shimmered with opulence. Candlelight floated above the floor, weightless and gold. Mirren stood at the center in ceremonial armor, too polished to feel real, his expression sculpted into stoicism. Sarah beside him, radiant in white and blue, her title practically humming behind her like a halo. They had been cast as the leads. But I knew something they didn't. Every scene can be stolen. When I stepped into the room, silence moved faster than sound. Every head turned. The hem of my mother's robes trailed behind me like smoke. My chin was high, my breath even. I didn't glow with a title. I didn't need to. I carried something heavier, defiance, sewn into memory. The crowd shifted. Some made room. Others looked away, but none looked through me. Even Mirren. He stared. I watched it happen, the story slip. His hand loosened from Sarah's elbow. His lips parted. Caliph? Not aloud, but in his bones. Sarah saw it too. She moved toward Sut. Me, perfectly poised, like a queen indulging a stranger. Caliph, she said, voice low but lethal. You weren't on the guest list. I stepped closer. Neither were half the plot twists in this room, but they showed up anyway. She tried to smile. You're only making this harder for yourself. I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. You can wear the crown, Sarah, but you'll always know the throne wasn't built for you. The silence between us rippled like cracked glass. If I'm dangerous, I whispered, it's because you gave me no other way to survive. The orchestra had stopped playing. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe I just couldn't hear anything over the pulse in my ears. I walked past her. Not toward Mirren, past all of them. Toward the center of the room, where every light could see me. And for a moment, just a flicker, the chandelier above me dimmed, as if even the story didn't know how to frame me anymore. As if I had stepped out of the page and into something far more dangerous. Reality, let them all feel it, let them all wonder. Who is she? What is she doing here? What happens now? Because from that moment forward, the script had no answer. Only questions. And I had just become one. It started with the birds. They flew backwards across the courtyard one morning, just for a moment, just long enough for my stomach to twist. Their wings beat against the wind like time had turned inside out, and no one else seemed to notice. Not even the boy who'd spilled his ink pot in perfect reverse. Not even the gardener, whose shears hung mid-air for 3 seconds too long. But I noticed, because I'd seen it before. Once, in a dream that wasn't mine, I had watched myself bleed beneath the blackroot tree behind the southern wall. In that version, I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I simply accepted the blade like I had been waiting for it my whole life. I died in silence, and the world applauded. In this timeline, I woke with ink in my veins and flame in my lungs. But those memories, those ghost versions of me, they never stopped showing up. Shards of stories I was never meant to outlive began to flicker across my vision like broken reels in a theater no one else could see. Me crumpled in a hallway, me weeping in chains, me smiling too gently seconds before poison curled my lips blue. It wasn't a memory, it was narrative pressure. The story wanted me back in place. I felt it tightening around me like a noose of paper cuts and expectation. And then, one night, I met its hands. They called themselves gatekeepers. They didn't wear armor, they didn't strike. From the shadows. They appeared in daylight, perfectly dressed, titles burning gold on their throats. Their presence felt like punctuation, final, absolute. They weren't assassins. They were editors. And they came to correct me. The first one approached me outside the archive tower, smiling with a politeness so smooth it made me nauseous. Caliph Arden, he said, as though announcing the weather. We've noticed some misalignment in your role. I should have run. Instead, I nodded. Then you'll understand when I say I'm no longer accepting edits. His eyes glinted. Characters don't get to decline direction. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Then maybe I'm not a character anymore. The smile didn't falter, but his form did. A flicker, a ripple beneath the illusion. And then, her face. My sister. Not the real one. Not Era, who'd drowned in the Frostflow Canal 5 years ago trying to save the wrong boy. But the image was flawless. Her hair the same shade of chestnut gold. Her freckles scattered like stardust across her cheekbones. Her voice, my gods. Her voice. Kale? She whispered. My knees buckled, but I didn't fall. Not again. Don't do this, she said. You're hurting people. You're unraveling things that kept the world safe. I couldn't breathe. The ache cracked through my chest so suddenly I thought I might actually fall back into the arc they'd carved for me. She stepped closer, trembling just enough to feel real. I miss you. We could have stayed together. If you'd just followed the story. But that's what stories do, isn't it? They make ghosts out of guilt and wrap them in the voices we miss most. No, I said, blinking hard. You're not her. Kalith, the Not Era whispered, stepping forward, hand outstretched. Please, let me fix this. That's when I saw it. The faint ink seeping from her fingertips, like words too tightly bound to skin, trying to push through. Scripted, controlled, fabricated. My grief tried to betray me, but I held it by the throat. You want me to play dead again? I breathed, teeth clenched. Sorry, I'm fluent in fire now. The illusion cracked. The skin of the creature flickered, and Era's form peeled like wet parchment, revealing the Fate Keeper beneath. Pale eyes, smudged edges, a body shaped from forgotten drafts. He moved to strike. But I didn't run. I spoke, not in screams, not in spells, in sentences. Words rose from my throat like smoke, heavy, sharp, absolute. You don't belong here, I whispered, the syllables tasting like ink and ash. This isn't your chapter. His hand faltered midair. A tremor ran through his chest like a string had been cut. Your role ends here, I said, louder now, stepping forward. Unnamed, unwritten, gone. His eyes widened. I didn't touch him. I didn't have to. The words unspooled from me like wildfire. Final, edited, true, and he vanished. Not with a scream, with a rewrite. The narrative fog swallowed him whole. The silence that followed was deeper than quiet. It was editorial, like the world itself had just backspaced him. And I stood there, shaking, fingers stained faintly black. The ink from the book I'd burned had never left me. It had settled in my marrow. And now it answered me. She was your memory, I murmured to the empty air. But she was my blood, and I won't bleed for your script. I expected applause. There was none. Just the echo of silence that follows something unnatural. I staggered back to my room, locking the door with 4 different sigils. My reflection in the mirror didn't blink for a second longer than it should have. I peeled off my gloves, expecting clean hands. The ink was there. Not visible, not literal, but felt. In the lines of my fingers, in the cadence of my voice, in the weight of what I could name. I had not just resisted the story, I had rewritten it, and for the first time I understood. I was no longer just the girl who refused to die in chapter 27. I was becoming something worse, something outside the cycle. An author. The door creaked once that night, though I never saw who stood on the other side. I only heard the words etched into the silence. She broke the line, someone whispered. And someone else, lower, older, terrified, replied. She's writing new ones. The council hall was never meant to hold echoes. Its arched ceilings and silver-veined columns were designed to swallow sound, to keep rage from reverberating, to ensure that accusations fell flat before they could ignite revolt. But that morning, when my name rang through the chamber like a curse, nothing could silence the shift. Kalith Arden, not whispered, not omitted, declared. My name, inkless and glowing, stood beside charges that were never meant to exist. Narrative deviation, unauthorized presence in scripted events, tampering with assigned arcs, seduction of a chosen title. They made it sound like a crime, but all I'd done was survive. The council sat in a semicircle, faces carved from centuries of order. At their center stood Myron, spine straight, expression unreadable. His title still shimmered behind him like a golden brand, the hero of the third flame, but something in the way he held himself said he'd already burned it. I stood beside the obsidian altar, the space reserved for the accused. I didn't bow. I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't pretend to repent. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat was louder than their judgment. Sarah spoke first. Of course she did. Her voice was silk stiff, thick with betrayal shaped into beauty. She has rewritten him, corrupted his clarity. Every choice he's made since the midwinter ball has been wrong. Wrong, one elder echoed. Off pattern, erratic. She isn't following the cycle, Sarah added, gaze locked on mine. She's dragging him out of it, and we will all pay for the fracture. I smiled, slow and sharp. You say that like the cycle ever worked for anyone who wasn't already wearing gold. The council didn't flinch, but Mirren breathed. A tremor, barely seen. One of the elders raised a decree scroll, etched in red glyphs. Calith Arden is hereby ordered to return to Isolation Ward 4, to await reclassification, to submit to narrative realignment. It wasn't a sentence, it was erased. They wanted to reset me, to bleach me back into the margins. I could already feel the ink tightening beneath my skin, like it remembered the fire I'd been born from. But before I could speak, he did. No. The scroll paused mid-air. Every gaze turned. Myron stepped forward, slow, deliberate, breaking formation like a soldier walking off the edge of a cliff. She doesn't submit, he said. Not anymore. Mirren! Sarah's voice cracked, but he didn't turn. She's not the disruption, he said louder. She's the evidence that the cycle doesn't know what it's doing anymore. You're compromised, one of the council members snapped. You were meant to mourn her. Her death is the ignition of your trial arc. She's not dead, he answered, voice steady. And maybe that's why I still feel like a lie. Silence. Real silence. The kind that comes before something breaks. Sarah stepped forward. You weren't supposed to love her. And that was when I spoke. Quiet, cold, unflinching. He doesn't. Mirren turned to me, startled. You weren't supposed to love me, I whispered. That was her arc. I didn't, he said, voice barely audible. I remembered you. That's worse. That broke something in me I hadn't realized I was still holding. Because he didn't say it with shame. He said it like a confession, like mourning, like memory was heavier than love. I didn't know what emotion showed in my eyes, but I knew the room shifted when it did. Runes across the marble floor, subtle glyphs woven into the stone, began to flicker, like the pattern itself was unsure whether to continue, like the script had hit a blank page. The song of naming stuttered. It was almost imperceptible, just a hiccup in the hum beneath the city, the rhythm that pulsed through every building, every mark, every title. But I felt it, in my bones. In the place where the burned book had branded me with unwritten ink. Someone in the back gasped as the banners began to ripple, not from wind, from misalignment. Sarah clutched her chest, her title dimmed. Mirren, she whispered, what have you done? He turned, fully now, to the council. Maybe I was never the hero, he said. Maybe she is. The glyphs glitched. One by one, the sacred lines that ran across the chamber walls began to fract. You're like cracked glass. Sentences flickered out. Chosen names shimmered uncertainty. One woman screamed when her husband's title vanished from her skin mid-embrace. And still, I stood at the center, unwritten, untouched. But suddenly I saw it. Because it wasn't just that I'd survived. It was that I'd been chosen by no one. And still changed everything. The song of naming let out one final shudder, and then fell silent. No hum, no pulse, just the echo of possibility and fear. And me, standing at the heart of it. Not a hero, not a victim, something else entirely. The council rose in chaos. Sarah's voice shattered the air. She's collapsing the system. But no one listened. Because they were too busy watching the pillars begin to glow. Not with flame, not with rune light. With words. New ones. ones that hadn't existed in the language before, ones that bent grammar like truth. I didn't know what I was becoming, but I knew this: they would never script me again. And the hero? He had just chosen the wrong page and made it real. They gathered beneath the obsidian arch like I was already ash, cloaked council scribes, students dressed in mourning blue, though no funeral had been declared. Sarah stood beneath the crown light with her chin lifted and her truth preloaded, like she'd been practicing this performance in front of a mirror etched with prophecy. And Mirren, he stood at the edge of it all, rigid as stone, burning with words he hadn't earned the right to say. The courtyard was still cracked from the last unraveling. The runes hadn't finished restitching themselves since the council chamber ruptured, and threads of half-glowing language still hovered in the air, half command, half question. The cycle was bleeding. They all felt it, and they blamed me. "She's corrupting the story," Sarah's voice rang out like a polished knife across marble. "The narrative no longer aligns because of her defiance. She's broken roles, destabilized the song. She is unwritten and dangerous." There was a time those words would have pierced me, when I would have stood there and tried to defend myself, tried to reclaim a place in a system that never wanted me. But I knew better now. The only thing more dangerous than a girl without a title was one who didn't want one. So I said nothing. I let the crowd murmur, their questions sharpened by fear. I met their eyes, one by one, and didn't shrink. Not for their certainty, not for their doubt. And then, Mirren moved. He stepped toward me like a man stepping into a battlefield, posture tense, voice trembling, not from fear, but memory. "Caliph, I held up a hand, and he stopped. "You think this is your moment?" I said softly. Not cruel, just clear. "The part where you redeem yourself by choosing me again. But this isn't a rescue scene." "I'm not trying to rescue you." "You are," I replied, voice steady. "You always were. Even when you thought you were mourning me. You loved me the way the story told you to. After I was gone." His jaw clenched. "It wasn't like that." I looked at him fully, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "Your love was written too late, and I won't wait for a rewrite." His breath caught. I walked past him. Just like that. No drama, no collapse, no tears, just release. And the sound that followed wasn't silence. It was a shock. Sarah didn't stop me. Neither did the scribes. I think, in that moment, they all realized something terrifying. That I no longer existed inside their logic. That I didn't need their roles, their corrections, their scripts. I left the courtyard with my head held high, heart steady, and the taste of freedom metallic and sharp on my tongue. And I walked. Past the fractured song halls, past the gardens where Sarah once smiled like a blade in bloom, past the gates etched with the names of those who mattered. I returned to the north wing, old, abandoned, forgotten. My mother's shrine, the place where the book first found me. The marble basin was cracked now, vines creeping through the stone like time had tried to erase her presence, but couldn't. Dust coated the altar in soft gray layers. But when I swept my fingers across the edge, something pulsed beneath. There, half buried in ash and stone, one shard of the book. A corner of charred leather. Still warm, still humming. I picked it up with both hands, expecting the tremble that followed. The fragment wasn't blank. It held one word. Faint, flickering, but whole. Caliph. My name. Not a role. Not a title, a name, and beneath it, etched in red, layered under ash, another word pulsed in foreign rhythm. Hidden, not erased, not smudged. Hidden. The revelation broke something in me, but not the way they wanted. It didn't shatter me, it unleashed me. The world hadn't declared me unworthy. It had tried to bury me because it knew I was too much, too loud, too knowing. Too unwilling to break in the right places. And they were right to be afraid, because if they couldn't name me, they couldn't control me. I pressed my palm to the stone and let the ink inside me pulse in time with that fragment. Not summoning, not pleading, acknowledging. This was mine. My name, my memory, my narrative, not approved, not assigned, just mine. I stood alone beneath the ruins, light bleeding through the cracked dome above, and whispered to the nothing and everything around me. You called me a ghost, I said, then screamed when I chose not to haunt you. The wind stirred. A few petals from the tree outside slipped in through the broken stone like falling punctuation. I don't need to be loved to matter, I continued. I just need to be remembered on my terms. And in that moment, the air pulsed once, like the world had heard me, not approved, not aligned, but listening. Behind me, far in the distance, I felt the song stutter again, and something new began to hum in its place. Not a song, a voice. Mine. It began with a silence I had never heard before. Not absence, not vacancy, but a stillness so full, so brimming, it felt like the breath before a name is spoken for the very first time. I stepped into the heart of Astera at dawn. The city should have been waking, horns echoing from the upper tiers, market doors groaning open, names thrumming across the marble streets like heartbeat song. But everything was paused, as if the cycle had taken its last breath and didn't know how to exhale. Beneath my feet, the stone flickered. Once, then again. Threads of gold laced through the ground, sentence fragments, orphaned symbols, rejected futures. I didn't flinch. I had seen the system from the inside. Now, I was watching it end. The sky above me, once scripted with celestial glyphs, had begun to blur. The stars shimmered uncertainty, as if even they were awaiting instruction. Titles flickered on people's skin, some dimming entirely, others freezing mid-glow. One man on the street held his hand to his throat, whispering the word healer like it was a spell he'd forgotten how to cast. Because it was. Their roles had been taught, assigned, believed, but none had been chosen. I moved through the crowd, and they parted like paper on fire, faces tight with fear, awe, something in between. No one called for guards, no one raised their voice, they simply watched. Because deep down, they knew. I wasn't part of the story anymore. I was the Rhea. Sun, the story, had stopped. The ink inside me pulsed with every step. Not like power, like recognition, like the world itself finally remembered that I didn't belong to its pages. I had burned the book, survived the edits, spoke sentences sharp enough to cut through fate. And now I could write. I reached the center of the Capitol Square, where the Monument of Names stood. A spire built of every title ever granted, carved from obsidian and flame glass, etched in 1,000 voices, and at the very top, a blank space. I never noticed it before, because it had been waiting for me. The ink in my bones rose to the surface like breath from a deep dive. My skin glowed, not with a title, not with prophecy, but with something deeper, older, free. A voice, gentle, ancient, mine, carved through the air. Origin, Caliph Arden, narrative instigator, ink-bound catalyst, possesses author rights. The words etched themselves into the spire. One line. Unrepeatable. Unassigned. Not a crown, a declaration. My legs nearly buckled beneath the weight of it. Not pain, clarity. It had never been about defying the story. It had always been about breaking it open, not to lead it, to end it. Not with destruction, with freedom. And I understood now why they called me dangerous. Because I was the one they couldn't predict, couldn't position, couldn't sacrifice for someone else's glory. I was not a catalyst for their arc. I was at the beginning of my own. Behind me, I heard murmurs ripple, voices unsure whether to praise or condemn. I didn't turn. I didn't need to, because at that moment, a small hand tugged at my sleeve. I looked down. A child, no more than 7, wide-eyed and barefoot, clutching a tattered notebook, stared up at me. They didn't bow. They didn't ask who I was. They just asked, in a voice trembling but clear, "What happens if the stories come back?" I knelt slowly until we were eye to eye. I smiled, not with pity, with power. "Then," I said, tucking a lock of hair behind their ear, "we write louder." And I knew they would, because they had seen me survive. And that meant they could too. I stood again, the city stretching before me, quiet, uncertain, infinite. Some would rebuild the song, some would cling to the old scripts, but others would take up ink and voice and begin. And I would watch. Not as a character, not as a ghost, but as the one who dared to pick up the pen first, because they wrote me as a footnote. But I took the pen. And now, I only write beginnings. We were taught to follow the script, to be quiet, agreeable, and grateful for the role we're given. But this story reminds us, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be written by someone else's hand. Kalith didn't fight to be the hero, she fought to own her voice, and in doing so, she broke the rules of her world. So now the question is yours. Are you still living by the script, or is it time you wrote your own? Let us know in the comments. What's the title of your next chapter? And if this story struck a chord, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because the stories we tell together are the ones they can't erase.